There are moments in life when the heart grows tired of carrying what it was never meant to hold forever. Moments when anger feels like strength, silence feels like control, and forgiveness feels like surrender. But what if the very thing we refuse to release is the weight that's slowly breaking us? This is a story about healing that doesn't come through winning, proving, or overpowering pain. It comes quietly, through understanding, through courage, through letting go. In a modest town where days passed without ceremony, there lived a father named Adrian Vale. He was a man shaped by discipline, defined by responsibility, and haunted by a wound he never spoke about. This is the journey that changed him, not by erasing the past, but by transforming it. Adrian Vale was not a man people worried about. He paid his bills on time. He woke before the sun. He fixed what was broken and carried what was heavy without complaint. From the outside, his life looked steady, quiet, even admirable. But strength, when practiced too long in silence, can harden into something else. He lived in a modest house at the edge of town where mornings smelled of dust and old coffee, and evenings arrived without announcement. The walls held years of family photographs, but none of them were recent. Smiles from another lifetime stared back at him. Frozen, polite, unfinished, Adrian never took them down. He believed memories deserved respect, even when they hurt. He was a father before he was anything else, not the loud kind, not the playful kind. He loved through responsibility, through providing, protecting, enduring. In his mind, that was what real care looked like. You showed up. You stayed strong. You didn't fall apart just because things became difficult. Forgiveness to Adrian was a soft word people used when they didn't understand consequences. He believed pain had rules. If someone caused it, they should carry it. Letting go felt like letting someone walk away untouched, and that, to him, felt wrong. So he held on. He held on to conversations that ended too abruptly. He held on to moments where he wished he had spoken differently. He held on to anger, because anger at least felt like strength. Each day followed a strict rhythm. Wake up. Work. Return home. Eat in silence. Sleep. Discipline kept him upright when emotions threatened to pull him under. Routine became his shield. If he stayed busy enough, maybe the past wouldn't catch up. But pain has a way of waiting patiently. At night, when the house settled and the world grew quiet, Adrian would sit alone at the kitchen table. No phone, no television, just the sound of the clock counting seconds he could never get back. This was when the weight returned, not loudly, not violently, but steadily. A familiar pressure in his chest, like something unfinished asking to be acknowledged. He told himself this was just the cost of being strong, that real men carried their wounds privately, that forgiveness was optional, but discipline was not. Still, something inside him was tired. Not the tiredness of work or age, but the exhaustion that comes from holding your breath for years, afraid that if you exhale, everything you've built will collapse. Adrian didn't yet know it, but the very strength he relied on was slowly turning against him. And somewhere beneath all that endurance, a quiet truth waited. You can survive without forgiveness, but you cannot heal. Before life taught Adrian Vale about forgiveness, it taught him about effort. He had learned early that nothing meaningful arrived without discipline. As a young man, he worked longer hours than required and asked for nothing in return. While others searched for shortcuts, Adrian built his life brick by brick, slowly, deliberately, without complaint. He believed consistency was a form of integrity. If you showed up every day, eventually life would respect you. And for a while, it did. His career stabilized. His home became a place others admired for its order and reliability. He was known as dependable, the man who would stay late, fix the problem, carry the load when others stepped back. People trusted him because he never broke, or at least he never showed cracks. Success to Adrian was not wealth or recognition. It was control. Control over circumstances, control over emotions, control over outcomes. He measured his worth through responsibility, through the ability to endure discomfort without asking for relief. When things went wrong, he didn't blame the world. He worked harder. When relationships strained, he tightened his grip on discipline, believing structure could replace emotional uncertainty. They were moments, quiet, fleeting moments when happiness brushed past him. Small victories, a promotion earned, a problem solved, a sense of being needed. These moments convinced him he was doing life correctly. But beneath the rise was a flaw he refused to see. Adrian believed strength meant never needing repair. That healing was something weaker people required. That forgiveness was a luxury reserved for those who could afford mistakes. When conflict appeared, he chose distance over dialogue. When disappointment arrived, he buried it under routine. He didn't process pain. He organized around it. He believed that if he built his life sturdy enough, emotional fractures would simply disappear. They didn't. Instead, they waited. The higher Adrian climbed through effort, the further he drifted from tenderness, from openness, from the uncomfortable vulnerability that real connection demands. He didn't notice it happening at first. Distance rarely announces itself. It grows quietly, disguised as maturity. People around him felt it before he did. Conversations shortened. Laughter softened. Emotional warmth cooled into politeness. Adrian interpreted this as adulthood, as the natural shedding of unnecessary softness. He told himself this was the price of becoming solid. And still, he pushed forward. Every achievement reinforced the same belief. If I stay disciplined enough, nothing can break me. If something hurts, work harder. If something leaves, stand taller. If something fails, endure silently. From the outside, Adrian Vale looked like a man rising. From the inside, something essential was being neglected. Forgiveness had not yet entered his vocabulary, not because he was cruel, but because he was afraid. Afraid that if he loosened his grip even slightly, everything he had built through effort and control would unravel. So he climbed higher, worked harder, held tighter. And that is often how the fall begins, not with chaos, but with confidence. The fall did not arrive with noise. It did not announce itself through disaster or public shame. It came quietly, through a moment Adrian believed he could control. It began with a conversation he had rehearsed in his mind 100 times, one he thought would bring clarity, order, resolution. Adrian had always trusted logic more than emotion, believing that if he explained himself clearly enough, pain would fall into place. But pain does not follow rules. The words he spoke were precise, measured, carefully chosen, and yet they landed wrong. What followed was not an argument, but something colder. A pause that stretched too long. A look that carried disappointment rather than anger. In that moment, Adrian realized something irreversible had shifted. Not broken loudly, but cracked deeply. He watched someone he loved withdraw in real time. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit, just a quiet decision made on the other side of the table. A distance created that could not be crossed with discipline or effort. Adrian felt it immediately. The helplessness of realizing strength could not fix this. He tried at first to correct it the way he corrected everything else. More structure, more control, more certainty. He doubled down on responsibility, believing consistency would rebuild trust. He avoided emotional discussion, convinced it would only reopen wounds. He told himself time would smooth things over. Time did the opposite. Days turned into weeks, weeks into silence. The house, once merely quiet, became hollow. Familiar routines lost their grounding. Meals tasted the same, but meant nothing. Conversations became functional, necessary, polite, distant. This was failure in its most confusing form. There was no single mistake he could point to, no moment he could undo, just a growing awareness that something precious had slipped beyond reach while he was busy being strong. At night, Adrian replayed the conversation again and again. He analyzed tone, timing, wording, searching for the exact point where things went wrong. But the truth was harder to accept. The failure was not in what he said, it was in what he never allowed himself to feel. For the first time, discipline abandoned him, not outwardly, but internally. His routines remained intact, yet their meaning collapsed. Strength began to feel heavy rather than empowering. Control, once comforting, now felt suffocating. And underneath it all, a dangerous thought emerged. What if holding on is what caused this? Adrian pushed the thought away. He wasn't ready to face it. Accepting that idea would mean questioning the very foundation of his identity. So he did what he had always done when uncertainty threatened him. He hardened. He told himself forgiveness was unnecessary, that people who left had already made their choice. That pain was simply something to outlast. He convinced himself he could carry this the same way he carried everything else. But this loss did not behave like the others. It followed him into every room, sat with him at every meal, spoke through the silence he could no longer ignore. The fall was complete. Not because he failed outwardly, but because his inner certainty collapsed. Adrian Vale, the man who believed strength could solve anything, was facing a truth he had never prepared for. Some things do not break because you are weak. They break because you never learned how to let go. Adrian did not accept the loss. He reorganized around it. Denial for him did not look like confusion or disbelief. It looked like certainty. He told himself he understood exactly what had happened and exactly why forgiveness was unnecessary. In his mind, the story was clear. He had done his part. He had stayed disciplined. He had remained responsible. If something fell apart, it wasn't because he lacked effort. It was because others couldn't endure. This belief gave him relief, at least temporarily. It allowed him to keep his identity intact. If he was not at fault, then nothing about him needed to change. He could continue forward exactly as he was, strong, controlled, unyielding. So he clung to the past. He replayed memories, but only the ones that justified his pain. He remembered sacrifices made without recognition, moments where he swallowed his own needs to keep things stable, times he chose duty over comfort. In these recollections, forgiveness felt unfair, like erasing the cost he had paid. Anger became his companion, not loud anger, not violent anger, but a cold, steady presence that kept his emotions contained. It filled the space where grief wanted to surface. As long as he stayed angry, he didn't have to feel how deeply he missed what was gone. Adrian convinced himself that holding on was an act of self-respect. To forgive, he believed, would mean admitting his pain didn't matter, that the wound could simply be dismissed, that endurance had been meaningless. So he resisted. He kept routines rigid, conversations brief, emotions locked behind discipline. When regret appeared, he reframed it as responsibility. When sadness crept in, he labeled it weakness. He had built his life on the belief that feelings were obstacles, not guides. But denial has a cost. The more Adrian justified his resentment, the heavier it became. The past stopped being something he remembered and started being something he lived inside. Every quiet moment dragged him backward. Every empty room echoed with words never spoken. He noticed it in small ways. His patience shortened. His sleep grew shallow. His presence felt distant even to himself. He was no longer just protecting his pain. He was feeding it. And pain, when fed, grows. Still, he refused to release it, because letting go would mean facing the grief beneath the anger. It would mean admitting that strength alone had not been enough. It would mean risking vulnerability after years of emotional control, and that terrified him. Adrian told himself he was fine, that this phase would pass, that time would dull the edges of loss without requiring forgiveness. He believed endurance would eventually turn into peace. But peace does not come from resistance. It comes from acceptance. And until Adrian was willing to face that truth, denial would keep him exactly where he was, stuck between a past he couldn't change and a future he couldn't reach. The pain was no longer sharp, it was settled, and that made it more dangerous. The lowest point did not arrive all at once. It settled in slowly, like dust in an abandoned room. Adrian's world grew quieter than he ever intended. Not peaceful, empty. The kind of silence that presses against your chest and asks questions you've been avoiding. He still woke early, still went to work, still completed every responsibility placed in front of him. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. The anger that once fueled him began to fade, leaving behind something heavier. Without it, there was nothing to distract him from the truth he had been resisting. He was alone, not just physically, but emotionally. And for the first time in his life, discipline could not cover the emptiness. Evenings became unbearable. He would sit in the same chair, staring at nothing in particular, feeling time move without him. The clock still ticked, but it no longer guided him forward. It mocked him, counting moments he felt unworthy of living fully. There were no tears, just a numbness so complete it frightened him. This was the cost of holding on too long. Pain, when carried without release, does not stay sharp. It goes dull, and dull pain seeps into everything. It drains color from ordinary days. It turns memories into weight. It convinces you that this is all life will ever be. Adrian stopped expecting relief. He stopped imagining reconciliation. Stopped believing healing was possible. Stopped asking himself what came next. He wasn't suicidal. He wasn't dramatic. He simply existed. And that, in its own quiet way, felt like a failure greater than any mistake he had made before. One night, as he stood alone in the dark kitchen, he caught his reflection in the window. For a moment, he didn't recognize the man staring back. The posture was familiar. The face was not. Something in his eyes looked tired beyond age, like someone who had been bracing for impact for too long. That was when the realization surfaced, uninvited and undeniable. I can't carry this forever. The thought didn't bring comfort. It brought fear, because if he couldn't carry it, then what was he supposed to do with it? He had built his entire identity around endurance, around being the one who held everything together. Admitting he was empty felt like surrender. And yet, beneath that fear, something else stirred. A faint awareness that this emptiness, this lowest point, was not a punishment, but a signal. A moment where the old way had finally reached its limit. Change did not arrive that night, but for the first time, Adrian stopped fighting the silence. He allowed himself to sit with it, to feel the weight without explaining it away, to acknowledge that surviving was no longer enough. This was the moment before transformation becomes possible. Not because answers appear, but because resistance fades. The encounter did not feel important at first. That is how most truths arrive. Unannounced, unremarkable, easy to dismiss. It happened on a morning Adrian almost stayed home. The air was cool, heavy with the quiet of early hours. He had gone out not for purpose, but for movement, walking simply to escape the walls that had begun to feel too close. His steps carried him to a small park he had passed 100 times before and never entered. That morning, he sat on a bench he had never noticed. A few moments later, someone else took the other end. An older man, thin and unhurried, feeding crumbs to birds that seemed to trust him without question. They sat in silence at first. Adrian didn't look over. He wasn't searching for conversation. He had learned how to exist beside others without inviting them in. But silence, when shared, has a way of softening people. "You look like someone who's been strong for a long time," the man said gently, without turning his head. The words landed heavier than Adrian expected. He almost dismissed them. Almost stood up and left, but something in the tone, unassuming, without judgment, kept him seated. He gave a small nod. Nothing more. The man continued, voice calm. "Strength does that. It teaches you how to carry things, but it doesn't teach you when to put them down." Adrian felt his chest tighten. He stared ahead, jaw set. No one spoke to him like this. No one ever named what he carried, and hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way he wasn't prepared for. "I don't believe in letting people off the hook," Adrian said quietly. "Some things shouldn't be forgiven." The man smiled, not kindly, not smugly, just knowingly. "Forgiveness isn't about letting someone else escape," he said. "It's about deciding how long you want to stay trapped." That sentence stayed suspended in the air. Adrian wanted to argue, to explain, to justify, but the words didn't come. Because for the first time, someone had said what he had refused to admit. His pain was no longer about the past. It was about the present he was sacrificing to keep it alive. The birds scattered. The moment passed. The man stood, brushing crumbs from his hands. Before leaving, he added softly, "You don't forgive because someone deserves it. You forgive because you deserve peace." Then he walked away, leaving Adrian alone on the bench with a truth he could not unhear. Forgiveness still felt impossible, but for the first time it felt necessary, and that was enough to begin. Rebirth did not feel dramatic, it felt awkward. Adrian expected change to arrive like a decision, firm, clear, final, but what followed the encounter was something far less certain. A hesitation, a quiet internal shift, a growing awareness that holding on had become more exhausting than letting go. Forgiveness did not come as a feeling, it came as a practice. At first it was simply restraint, the decision not to replay old conversations, the discipline to stop feeding anger with memory. When resentment surfaced, as it always did, Adrian learned to notice it without obeying it. This was unfamiliar territory. He had spent his life mastering control over action, not over thought. Some days he failed. He would catch himself returning to old narratives, stories where he was justified, wounded, unacknowledged. In those moments, the anger felt warm, familiar, almost comforting. Letting it go felt like stepping into cold air without armor, but he stayed. Small steps replaced grand resolutions. He cleaned the house not to erase the past, but to make space for something new. He began walking in the mornings, not to escape his thoughts, but to sit with them. He allowed silence to exist without immediately filling it with discipline. This was humility in its quietest form. Adrian started noticing how much energy he had spent resisting pain instead of understanding it. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't a single act. It was a repeated choice. A choice to stop tightening his grip every time memory knocked. Healing arrived in fragments, a full breath without tension, a night of uninterrupted sleep, a moment where the past passed through his mind without leaving a bruise. These moments were brief, but they mattered. He didn't reach out yet. He didn't repair what was broken. The rebirth wasn't about reunion. It was about release, about learning to exist without the weight of resentment shaping every step. For the first time in years, Adrian allowed himself to feel sadness without turning it into anger. He let grief move through him instead of building walls around it. It hurt, but it was clean pain, honest pain, the kind that heals instead of festers. Strength, he began to understand, was not endurance alone. It was the courage to soften without collapsing, to forgive without forgetting, to move forward without denying where you've been. The old version of him resisted this understanding, but the new one was listening. Rebirth rarely announces itself. It whispers. It asks you to trust small changes before offering large peace. Adrian wasn't healed, he wasn't free, but he was no longer stuck. And that made all the difference. Healing does not erase old habits, it invites them back to test you. Just when Adrian began to feel steadier, the past returned, not as memory, but as opportunity. A message, a name on a screen he hadn't expected to see. No accusation, no apology, just a quiet reminder of everything he had been learning to release. His chest tightened instantly. The old reflex surged forward, the familiar urge to retreat into anger, to armor himself with certainty, to reclaim control by shutting down emotionally. This was the moment that mattered most. Not the days of reflection or quiet growth, but the instant when healing was challenged. Forgiveness, he realized, is easy in isolation. It is tested in connection. Adrian felt the pull to respond from his former self, to speak from pride, to protect his wounds by reopening theirs. It would have been effortless, natural, satisfying in the short term. He didn't. Instead, he paused. He noticed how his body reacted. Tight shoulders, shallow breath, racing thoughts. He named the feeling without judging it. Fear, vulnerability, the risk of being hurt again. This awareness alone slowed him down. Strength showed up differently this time. Not as control, but as restraint. Not as silence, but as intention. Not as withdrawal, but as honesty. His response was simple, measured, without accusation or defense. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not demand understanding. He spoke from where he was, not where he used to be. And then he let go of the outcome. That was the hardest part. Old Adrian would have replayed the exchange endlessly, searching for dominance or validation. This Adrian chose peace over perfection. He allowed uncertainty to exist without tightening his grip. The struggle didn't end there. Doubt followed him for days. Questions resurfaced. Was I too soft? Did I give too much? The temptation to retreat into old patterns lingered. Healing does not protect you from discomfort. It teaches you how to stay present through it. And Adrian stayed. Each time resentment tried to reassert itself, he returned to the same practice. Notice, breathe, release. Discipline returned, not as rigidity but as consistency. The daily choice to respond differently, to honor progress without demanding certainty. This was strength refined, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that endures honestly. Not the kind that wins, but the kind that heals. The new struggle proved something essential. Transformation is not proven by how much you change in solitude, but by how you show up when old wounds are touched. Adrian did not emerge untouched. He emerged truer. Peace did not arrive as happiness. It arrived as steadiness. Adrian noticed it one morning while standing by the window, watching light stretch slowly across the street. Nothing remarkable had happened. No message. No breakthrough. No reconciliation. And yet, something inside him felt settled. The past no longer rushed at him when his mind wandered. Memories came and went without demanding reaction. They were still there, but they no longer owned him. Forgiveness had done what discipline alone never could. It loosened time's grip on his heart. Purpose began to return, not as ambition, but as presence. Adrian listened more, spoke less, but with intention. He stopped measuring strength by how much he could endure and started measuring it by how honestly he could live. Relationships softened, not because others changed, but because he did. He no longer needed control to feel safe. There was space now, space for laughter that didn't feel forced, for silence that didn't ache, for moments that existed without being analyzed. The weight he had carried for so long had been replaced by something lighter, not joy, but peace. And peace, he learned, was enough. Forgiveness had not rewritten the past. It had rewritten him. He still believed in discipline, still valued responsibility, but they were no longer weapons against emotion. They were tools for balance. Strength and softness existed side by side, no longer at war. Adrian found meaning in ordinary days, in simple routines that no longer felt like survival tactics, in the quiet understanding that healing did not require permission from the past. The new dawn was not loud. It did not announce victory. It simply arrived, steady, warm, real. And for the first time in a long while, Adrian was not bracing for loss. He was living. There comes a moment in every journey when the story stops being about the character and begins to speak to you. Adrian's path was never about becoming stronger than others. It was about becoming honest with himself, about understanding that forgiveness is not a gift you give to someone who hurt you. It is a release you give to yourself. Some wounds do not heal through time alone. They heal through courage, the courage to stop carrying what no longer serves you. Forgiveness does not erase what happened. It frees you from reliving it. It does not excuse behavior. It ends bondage. It does not make you weak. It returns your strength to you. Holding on may feel like power, but it slowly drains your life. Letting go feels risky, but it opens the door to peace. Discipline can build a life, but only forgiveness can soften it enough to live inside. You are allowed to grow beyond your pain. You are allowed to choose peace without betraying your past. You are allowed to become someone new, even if no one apologizes. Healing is not loud. Transformation is not instant. Rebirth begins quietly, when you decide that your future deserves more than your resentment. If this story found you at a moment when you are tired of holding on, let it be a reminder. You don't have to carry everything forever. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is let go. If this story gave you something to reflect on, take a moment to sit with it. And if you believe someone else needs to hear it, share it. Stay with stories that heal. Subscribe for journeys that remind you of your strength. Peace is waiting.